the launching of the Global Forest Coalition report, our report titled Depth, Displacements, and Biodiversity Loss, assessing the gender, environmental, and human rights implications of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The report revealed the huge impacts of the China-backed large-scale infrastructure projects on communities and environment. Examples from Kenya, Indonesia, and Argentina are developed in the report. So we will hear from Allie Constantine, a researcher and editor working with Global Forest Coalition. Allie will present this report and reveal its content to us. As you know, the Global South is constantly facing dangers produced by the frantic race of transnational companies towards profits. In addition to the BRI consequences, the Global South continues to be a terrain of monoculture plantations, another form of extractivism, which has also a tremendous consequences on the communities, consequences on livelihoods, and the environment. Suparna Lahiri, Global Forest Coalition Senior Campaign and Biodiversity Policy Advisor, will tell us more about the frustration of communities and the campaign around the plantation in Global South. So the BRI and plantations are a curse of the Global South communities. So let's hear what exactly we mean by curse by hearing Allie Constantine revealing the reports, the first presentation to us. Allie, over to you, 20 minutes. Thank you so much for your availability. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kwame. It's also a really good introduction into the problems we're facing. I'm just going to share my screen now. And okay, so today I will discuss the Belt and Road Initiative, which many of you probably already know about, and I'll refer to it from now as the BRI because it's a bit easier. It's essentially China's massive infrastructure project that encompasses a lot of different things like transport, internet, healthcare, and way beyond. So it has really far and wide-reaching consequences for the world. And so we'll focus today mostly on local communities and indigenous communities, the environmental impacts and the human rights impacts that are produced from these projects. And our emphasis today is on Kenya, Indonesia, and Argentina. And we want to emphasize precisely how the BRI is impacting people through worsening or continuing extractivism so that we can provide better recommendations to improve these systems if it's possible. And a lot of the times, one of the questions that comes up when researching the BRI or talking about the BRI is how exactly is it helping people, if at all, or is it worsening the problems that we're seeing already? And for the Global South, a lot of the times this is very clear, it is worsening it. So sorry about that, that was supposed to be this slide. I'll skip over. So I'll highlight some of the cases we found, some of the studies we did on some of the, some of the case studies we undertook, beginning with Kenya. And so in Kenya, there's this system called the Standard Gauge Railway Project, which is a significant railway infrastructure development connecting Nairobi to Mombasa and extending through East African countries. It's partially funded by Chinese banks, and it's been a cornerstone of Kenya's plan to become what they say is industrialized middle-income country by 2023. While some of the sections are completely done, a lot of them are not. And questions about the economic viability have come up, and there's lots of concerns about inequality, human rights, and environment that we will discuss. Through the research, we also found a lot of reports noting the historical experience with colonization and railways in Kenya that have left a lasting impact on many of the communities there. Some see the SGR as a modern form of colonization, which is echoing the English colonization and railways from the past. There's been lots of concerns, not only in Kenya, but broadly, about neo-colonialism, which have grown due to Kenya's external debt to Chinese banks and the government, which has been increasing significantly. Despite Chinese reports of the job creation and economic growth, studies reveal that only a privileged minority has really benefited, while disadvantaged groups face many more economic hardships. And rural communities in particular find their mobility and access to essential resources, family and community affected by the railway, often forcing migration to Nairobi. Another notable project we examined is the Badung high-speed railway, which is funded by China. And there have been many concerns about environmental damage, human rights issues, and complete absence of any consultation with community. And one of our member groups, Wali, who's a prominent environmental NGO in Indonesia, has taken legal action, but their efforts actually face complete disregard from the Chinese authorities. And so as of 2023, the project proceeds with very limited to no community involvement, raising questions about its impact on local communities. And this situation echoes broader issues seen with BRI projects worldwide, that a lot of the cases have the same issue, where development really takes precedence over community well-being. Wali emphasizes the need for gender-inclusive impact assessments and community participation as well, which China has not engaged in. In Argentina, there are lots of concerns over the environmental and human rights impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative projects, specifically around transition material mining, which we'll discuss a bit more later on in the presentation. But there have been reports from the collective on Chinese financing and investments that reveal that many BRI projects in general in Latin America contribute to deforestation, water pollution, and human rights violations, which particularly affect indigenous and local communities. Historically, extractive industries have led to increasing and social environmental decline in Latin America. And China's investment in lithium extraction, among other extractive processes, really makes the situation worse. So addressing these consequences is crucial, especially as China and Argentina intensify their involvement in the sector, and as more Latin American countries engage with BRI projects in China. So GFC in the past has continuously emphasized the gendered impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative, which have long been a concern. Despite growing awareness of these issues, progress remains really slow. And in 2012, research on gendered impacts of BRI projects is still incomplete, if non-existent, and comprehensive assessments are lacking. China should have an obligation to report on these, given they are signatory to key UN human rights treaties, but there is no reporting really. Adding to the complexity is that a lot of the BRI projects are privately funded and there's no obligation to report, so they often don't. This limits access to information to see what's going on. Still, if you look at prior studies that we've done through many different reports, we can see that commodity trade in general is usually dominated by men and harms women in various different ways. We need to push for an increase in gender reporting on the BRI systems to help understand and mitigate these harms. Because I really want to emphasize that not having information and not having access to information does not mean that something does not exist. In fact, this lack of reporting leaves women and all of their diversities in a much worse situation politically and legally. So I'll discuss some of the gendered impacts of these case studies more specifically, because we found there were clear gendered impacts in them. In Kenya, the negative economic and human rights impacts disproportionately affect women, especially in rural areas where 80% of Kenyan women live. The construction of the SGR disrupted a lot of rural routes, and it made it difficult for women to be able to collect essential resources like wood, food, medicines, and water. This makes existing challenges a lot worse, as women are often responsible for unpaid agricultural labor and often lack access to land and credit. Displaced women who either lived or worked along the railway are facing livelihood losses and increased vulnerability to gender-based violence. Their access to compensation is also hindered. Any compensation at all that is very non-existent is hindered by social norms and exclusion from decision-making processes in general. If we look at the high-speed railway in Indonesia, a common issue that we discussed before is the lack of consultation, but there's also a huge democratic deficit which prioritizes development over the well-being of communities and the environment. Strong movements are really needed to advocate against harmful ventures, which Wally has emphasized in the report, and women often play a pivotal role in these campaigns. However, as we discussed in a few other reports, the increased visibility and activity on the front lines puts women at risk of gender-based violence and environmental harm. We need to emphasize, again, that BRI projects must always include a gendered impact analysis in consultation with communities, but we also need to take into account how resistance also creates problems like gender-based violence, and we need to focus on that as well, because that's often overlooked. In Argentina, we see that with the transition material mining, Indigenous women have often faced the most severe impacts of the lithium extraction, including through violence and limited access to resources. The expansion of lithium mining through Chinese investments makes these challenges and a lot worse, and really demands that we pay more attention to what's happening as we engage with a just transition or energy transition, because often we look at the negative impacts of coal, but there's a lot of really bad emerging negative impacts coming forth from energy transition. So in all of these cases, it's also been very clear environmental impacts. All of them in some way have contributed to deforestation, habitat destruction, water pollution, and increased carbon emissions. The consequences of this, of course, impacting local communities, biodiversity, and the global climate. In Kenya, approximately 25% of the population are pastoralists, including many Indigenous communities, and Indigenous women already face social and cultural prejudices, and they are also impacted by the SGR railway's construction, especially as they go through their routes, and it impacts wildlife routes as well. It has led to land degradation, ecosystem destruction, flooding, water contamination, and severe disrupted wildlife movement. Oil spills are also a major concern, and there have been many transport accidents that have further harmed the environment and communities as well. In Indonesia, organizations like Wali oppose the project due to its impact on forests, waterways, biodiversity, and the increasing human rights violations. Again, they emphasize the lack of consultation, and where this could have been avoided in some way with consultation. But the question with all of this becomes, who's benefiting from these projects? It's usually the people who already have money and resources. So back to a just transition that is discussed often, but it's not really, there's nothing just about it. BRI projects extend to transition from fossil fuels like oil and gas, but a lot of challenges persist as well. China's commitment to transitioning away from coal and fossil fuels is not at all reflected in its overseas practices. BRI projects still require immense coal and fuel resources for construction and shipping, among other things. However, different energy projects also have their own problems and create environmental problems of their own. For instance, a hydropower dam in Indonesia raised really bad human rights and environmental concerns, very clear ones, and the construction is still continuing despite this. Another problem that we see with the BRI is industrial parks. And so, for example, the Indonesia Morowali Industrial Park is linked to Chinese banks. And it's basically a coal plant that is allowed to operate despite the commitment against coal. It's causing environmental destruction, air pollution, deforestation, and impacts local communities, of course. China's involvement, heavy involvement in lithium mining, like in Argentina, the Cuchari Oloros lithium mine has completely, lacks any comprehensive environmental impact studies, and there's been no consultation with indigenous communities. And we know for a fact that lithium mining and battery production carries significant environmental impacts and emissions. So there's a lot going on there that we don't know about because there's a complete lack of transparency as well. Also, the people who are affected by it are not seeing, are not being told what's going on. So it's really hard to fight it. Mining extractivism's impact on historical implications, are continuing in Latin America, impacting indigenous people and local communities. And indigenous women specifically bear the brunt of these impacts because they're advocating for their rights, their lands, and their environment amidst systemic marginalization, gender-based violence, and limited access to resources. And as I said before, this information is often hidden from them, and there's a massive lack of transparency around mining sites. And this is seen everywhere, really, and also in Canada. So addressing this social, environmental, and gender dimensions of extractive industries going forward is absolutely crucial. Because we're running out of time a little bit, I'll move on to some of the recommendations we have. They're more in-depth in the report itself, so I do recommend you check that out after this for more information. But I'll go over some of the more important ones, not necessarily more important ones, but the more easier to share ones right now. So we need to shift our focus a bit to how can we do something about this? What can we do as individuals? What can we do as collectives? And what can we do as groups? And so the recommendations to everyone essentially is we need to demand accountability. We need to hold China and other actors accountable for these Belt and Road projects when the information is available. We need to raise awareness and advocate for more transparency in project planning and execution. And we really need to support people who are on the front lines, who are doing the work already, like Wally and other groups who are resisting because they are facing the consequences. They're also making change and they need our help. So having said that, we need to support Indigenous peoples and local communities who are on the front lines of climate justice in general, but who are also on the front lines of BRI resistance. It's important that we stand with affected communities because they know what's going on firsthand on the ground, particularly Indigenous peoples and women. And we need to amplify their voices and concerns. Their perspectives must be central, not part of, but central in decision-making processes in these situations. And we really need to focus on environmental stewardship, I guess is the word, but raise awareness about the environmental impacts and advocate for the protection of those who steward the land and the land itself. So Indigenous peoples who are already stewarding the land, we need to protect and allow them to have a voice, not allow them to, that's the wrong word, prioritize their voice in these conversations. And we also need to focus on prioritizing future generations as well to protect the environment for the future. The recommendations to China there's a lot, but I'll just do a few. Really important ones that I want to emphasize is consultation, because every case that I've seen, there's been a complete lack of consultation with the communities, including Indigenous peoples and women. there's been no benefits for these communities who are impacted, and the consultation is lacking, and that includes there needs to be a free, prior, and informed consent with Indigenous communities that are being impacted. And so far, we haven't really seen any of that, at least in these cases. They need to focus on environmental protection over greenwashing. They need to commit to protecting ecosystems and minimizing environmental damage of these projects. And they really need to stop greenwashing. So they have the whole green BRI, and stopping coal, but then they're still they still have the industrial parks that are producing coal, and they're still engaged in not necessarily coal production, but coal proliferation around the world. So I really fail to see how the BRI is green at the moment. So they need to prioritize transparency on that. As well as human rights, they need to uphold human rights standards and gender impact reporting, because there's none in BRI projects. And finally, transparency is a huge one. There needs to be information available, and it's so hard to find information from the Chinese government. So that needs to change. It's easier said than done, I guess, to ask for more transparency from a government, but I find it really difficult to find information because it's so hidden a lot of the times, and you hear most of it through third parties. So China should prioritize that if they want to make a difference. I think I'm really running out of time, so I hope I didn't go over time. I'll leave it there and stop sharing my screen. So thank you so much for listening, and I really hope you can look at the report as well, where everything is covered more extensively. So I'll hand it back over to Kwame. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali, for your brilliant presentation. The recommendations are noted. We need to continue demanding accountability, raising awareness, so people know the danger of the BRI. And moreover, there is a clear environmental impacts. Emission of CO2, deforestation, and habitat destruction. I think those are the impacts communities are facing when it comes to extractivism, when it comes to projects that are profiting not the communities, but profiting the companies. And in this case, BRI, and in another case is multinational that are very much involved in plantations. Having that said, thank you once again, Ali, for your presentation. Now, let's move on to the second presentation before we open the floor for questions and comments. We're gonna hear from Suparna Lahiri on the impact of plantations in the Global South. And we also gonna hear on green capitalism. What is it? And also, what are the suffering of communities if we talk of plantations in the Global South? Suparna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kwame. I'm not going to speak much on just trying to introduce the political. See, you know, plantations are not forest, and what are plantations? This is a long campaign that has been carried on by GFC for very long time. The thing is that perhaps what I'm trying to do now is also to put the issue of plantations, which after very I would say, concerted and strong campaigns over the years is still there. And there are people who are trying to also stand by on the issue of that we require plantations. And as you know, afforestation and reforestation often are transformed into simply monoculture plantations. But within the context of the climate and biodiversity discourse, the issues of greenwashing, um, perhaps we need to move a bit beyond with a more political context, giving a political context to the issue of plantations, and why still you see billions of dollars of climate finance being invested into these monoculture plantations. So just giving a basic kind of a thing around global south, probably one or two examples from Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. What I'm trying to share as a kind of an initial initial thoughts, which should be developed in the days to follow, is how to link this issue of climate finance for plantations to not only in terms of the impact of plantations, but greenwashing, but why this investment is coming in, why public investment, blended finance, uh, Green Climate Fund, or Global Environment Facility is still trying to put money in the projects which are actually simple monoculture projects, and thus to link it to uh, the new political economy or the economic paradigm that we are seeing, or the transformation that we are seeing in front of us, where I'm initially using the phrase green capitalism, is what I wanted to just share in this context. And so, just to give you a few examples, how it is also the plantations earlier used to use, in terms of timber plantations for wood, furniture, construction, and how it is being transforming into a kind of a false solution in the context of the climate change and biodiversity loss. So probably this is a very basic, uh, these are the basic highlights that we get in terms of the impact of the plantations. But as I am trying to see that linking to what Kwame and Allie is increasingly pointing out too, which has not ended, the colonial economy of extraction, um, and how far it is still there uh, within the context of greenwashing, climate change, and biodiversity loss, and how plantations play a role in it. What I'm trying to see is that these are short rotation crops, could be 17 to 15 years in use, and then you harvest for wood. So you extract, harvest for wood, you can use as biochar, or you can use for biomass burning. And then the wood is used for consumption, furniture, construction industry, and mainly the timber industry. And the biomass is burned for bioenergy. And then you harvest, and so you harvest and plant again. So what you're doing, you are extracting, and then you are trying to renew the growth of the new set of plantations, and this renews the production of wood and biomass itself. It's becoming a legitimate economy of extraction of these resources, but this resource is not infinite. As you see in many of the colonial extraction process and sectors, specifically oil and gas or coal, what you extract is finite in that on that piece of land. But here, this extraction is not limited or restricted or finite. So you have resources which can be extracted, and then because it is infinite, the trees can again go, you can renew actually. So uh, and therefore renewable. So and next I'm trying to relate to some of the climate change crisis, the uh, nationally determined commitments of the country. And so you have from India this compensatory afforestation fund, where the industry deforests and pay an amount for deforestation, which we call is paid according to the net present value, depending upon the quality and density of forest. And then this fund is used for afforestation elsewhere, which is basically plantation. And so these plantations over the years are used for increasing tree and forest cover all over the country. So what we have now is that if the geographical area of the forest, much of it is deforested, the plantations take you beyond those forests and then add the area which is planted, and then you have this new data and the phraseology invented by the forest bureaucracy when they say that the total tree and forest cover. So they hide the deforestation or the state of very bad health of the forest inside the uh, natural growth of the primary forest cover. And so then this increased forest cover is linked to enhanced carbon stock and carbon sequestration. And this is now being used internally to offset industrial emissions. But what happens also in terms of very shortly, briefly on impacts is that there are, apart from the farmlands, they're trying to forcibly have plantations on even forest lands, which are right holders' land. And this is a huge impact on the forest communities where the village councils don't have uh, their say now. And as according to the Forest Rights Act, anything that you do on the right holder's land has to be a consent of the village council. And so there are conflicts growing across the country wherever these plantations are forcibly done on the forest land, which is where the communities or the village council have a right to. And then it hugely impacts on women among the forest communities, because as we see in India and like many other countries, essentially one who kind of for their everyday life and livelihood uses the forest most in terms of collection of NTFP, collection of firewood, and then preserving and protecting forest, and even traditional agricultural practices within forests, street seed bank. This is all being done mostly by the women. So women are bearing the brunt of these plantations being forcibly done on the right holders' land. And then we come to Indonesia, where it seems that what is happening is that you deforest and then we plant. And so already what we have is 38% of plantation areas are derived from deforestation. And bioenergy plantations are fast coming up. And these bioenergy plantations will be used for biomass burning as fuel for co-firing in coal-fired plants. So Indonesia has a large amount of coal-fired plants, and the proposal is now to use 10% at least co-firing of biomass, so that they can say that the usage of coal has been decreased, and so the emissions have come down. And so, but the report that has been published by Trade Asia last year points out that even to do this, there's a potential required area for bioenergy plantations, which is 2.33 million hectares, which is equal to 35 times the area of spatial capital region of Jakarta. And so they project that if the coal-fired plants are transformed as per the proposal to co-firing with biomass burning, thereby saying that the coal is now abated. So it is fit for continuation. So those coal-fired plants' life could be increased, and continued burning coal, that will result in an accelerated deforestation rate of 2.1 million hectares per year. Now, so what we see is that billions are invested across. You have bond challenge, which we know already how it is affecting, and which has almost 45% of the projects under monoculture. You have the New York Declaration, and you have the Africa, deforestation 100 project, which is an increase, which will result in a 91% increase in the area for plantations. And these are all being not only financed by the bilateral public funds from Germany, France, Norway, or the United States, but also Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facility, and we know because GFC has worked extensively on the Arboro Fund, which is financed by the Green Climate Fund, and this is a fund which is typically more a private fund, which is being propped up by public finance, de-risking the private investment into it. And if we go more into that, we will see that there are further investments in projects by the Forest Investment Program and the Climate Investment Fund. And then we go more or less to the Arboro Fund, and I'm going into it a bit, not in whole details, because this covers actually large areas of 7 countries in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. And these are Ghana, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Uganda, Paraguay, Peru, Ecuador. And this is a project which is actually fit for saying that how plantations are being promoted through public finance and private finance and blended finance, where it doesn't it doesn't mitigate in any way either climate change or biodiversity loss. It continues, it promotes continued use of wood, timber. It promotes wood for biomass burning, for bioenergy, and the carbon sequestration potential that is being written in the project documents often are laughable, because as you can see in terms of Arboro, is that it's the Arboro Fund's life for this project is up to 15 years. And you are making a projection for carbon sequestrations beyond 15 years. And if they are harvested, the the whole project goes out of, after 15 years, out of the hands of our fund. So whether the trees will live beyond 15 years, or if they are harvested, the carbon is emitted back into the atmosphere. So there is a very strong case of lack of permanence, and more that it is being that the project is acquiring farmlands, as it's showing in Paraguay, uh, and it, in countries like Ghana, it is you know these plantations are being established in forest reserves, where the forest communities have their stake, and so they, as we know, that the civil society organizations had long sent a letter of deep concern to the Green Climate Fund, which has a equity stake, and they have articulated why this project should not have been approved by the board, but in 2021, the GCF board actually approved that, and we can see right now how it is extending beyond uh, what it was there in the project in terms of violating the policies of the GCF, the indigenous policy, the gender policies, because it is now transforming and expanding itself into various sub projects, which is very difficult to monitor actually. And what is happening and what will happen to those sub projects of Arbor, uh, only God knows actually in that sense. Uh, so again, we have talked of how the again and again this issue of public finance prioritizing public private sector by de-risking them, and then you know uh, the promotion of forestry companies which are promoting plantations, and then this whole issue of it is not basically this GCF or GEF or any of these public financial funds in the bilateral funding is not actually ensuring a paradigm shift or transformational change in the global response to climate change. Uh, so I'm just going into another example in Brazil, which is Suzano. And I'm saying this again, we are seeing that such a big pulp and paper company, which is one of the largest vertically integrated producers of eucalyptus pulp and paper in Latin America. And it has presence in 5 Brazilian states. It has 8 pulp facilities, 6 paper mills, and then manages currently 2.6 million hectares of plantations, of which at least 1.6 million is eucalyptus. And this company's project is now being has been already funded with a loan by the International Finance Corporation, the private sector wing of the World Bank. And then the bilateral fund based in Netherlands is all set to fund and invest further $40 million into this fund. So, as I said before, curiously, plantations, growing of them, which is basically harming forest and biodiversity, nothing to do with mitigation of climate change and biodiversity loss, is curiously being promoted and funded through climate finance portfolios. Now, my last thing which I'm trying to just capture in short, the political context, some thoughts which we can go, we can expand, which we can actually research more, we can discuss, we can go beyond, is that wherever we see the plantations are often referred to as greening the land. And so part of false solutions to promote the so-called green economy, which is being financed mostly by the rich Western countries and the big polluters. Use of public finance, de-risking private finance, blended finance, and extraction continues. But what happens is that the extraction shifts from finite resources to infinite resources like land, forest, and natural resources, which is now often referred to as natural capital. And investing in natural capital, uh, you know, getting returns from the natural capital, seeing land, forest, and natural resources as assets is a new form of green capitalism or early forms of green capitalism that we are seeing today. And we need to dig more, work more, discuss more on how to strategize against these forms of capitalism, which is now shifting from investing in finite resources to infinite resources, referring to natural capital and talking of and saying that the next class of assets will be land, forest, and natural resources. So I would invite more thoughts on this and thank you for being here and listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suparna, for your clear presentation. You stated it clearly that plantations are not forests, that plantations are not climate solution. And it is clear that different projects in different places under the same system of operation lead to same consequences on the ground, on communities in the global south. And the plantations is the driver of deforestation as well. And also plantations is used to as a solution to climate. But we disagree with them. We disagree with the GCF proposal regarding plantations. Thank you so much, Suparna, for your presentation. Now we're going to open the floor for questions, comments. We have a few minutes. It's 1 p.m. So we can devote 10 minutes for questions, comments, to better understand the both presentation. I don't see any hands. Is there any hands? No. Yeah, so one question for Suparna, another one to Ali. Suparna, what will be your main recommendation if you have to give one or two recommendations? What will be those recommendations to us and to the Climate Green Fund? That is a question for you. And for Ali, how do you think we can shape our campaign towards Chinese investments to tackle them effectively? What is your thoughts about how we can shape our campaign to be more effective on the ground together with the communities affected? Thank you so much. So maybe Suparna, you can start first, and then Ali can have the floor. And we have Sirius also.
Kwame, I heard you about the second one. What will be the first question that you said?
The first question is for you.
Yeah.
I'm asking if you have to give one or two recommendations regarding the Green Climate Fund. What will be those recommendations to tackle the first solutions that Green Climate Fund is promoting?
Okay. So I'll start with what the CSO recommendation was. So as I said, the CSO recommendation, the civil society recommendation to the Green Climate Fund Board was simply to not to approve the project, because you cannot use public finance to prop up private finance, and then where a project goes beyond the realm of the Green Climate Fund in terms of its own safeguard policies, and question the, again, what I said, question the entire calculation of carbon sequestration. But as GFC, we are going into the kind of, again, trying to see how we tackle the issue of climate finance and false solutions into campaign. So this is the first thing that we are trying to do, is we are going into a campaign where we are saying that the divest public climate finance from false solutions, and the initial campaign document was launched in June 2023. It's in the website, and we are going to kind of go beyond this, linking up the bilateral climate finance fund, the multilateral climate finance fund, also to see that this issue of not financing false solutions, rather divesting from false solutions, but redirecting them towards more real solutions which are gender just and rights based and ecosystems based. So this is what, as GFC, in terms of campaign, we are going to do. And that same thing is for GCF. We will call to the GCF again as more reports come in terms of the Arboro Fund and the recent and Green Fund, and so we would renew our call to the GCF in that sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Suparna. Ali, let's hear from Ali.
Yes, thank you. So you're asking how we can shift our campaign to Chinese investments to tackle them more effectively. And I really think demanding transparency is so important here, because a lot of the times we don't know where the funding is and where it's coming from, and a lot of the times it's hidden behind private financing. So it's really hard to fight what you can't find or can't see. And so I think we really need to figure out together where the financing is and where it's going, and work together to demand this accountability, because it's important, but we also really need to know where the financing comes from. So that said, I think really keep protesting, because this has made a really big difference. Actually, we can look at an example that was in the report in Kenya. The Lamu power plant was effectively shut down through protesting on the ground, because it was deemed unsafe and not successful for Kenya as a whole. So that was shut down, which is great. Another example is in Indonesia, I believe. In the last report, there was protesting. I don't remember if it was a hydropower plant or a road, but there was a lot of protesting, and the World Bank then refused to fund it. So this caused it to either be slowed down or halt completely. I need to double check on that and see how it's going, because this is a bit older. But going back to China being a bit, not really a bit, being very non-transparent. If you look at the same project, they were very they put out a notice saying, we are really sorry to hear that you are protesting this. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. We're really sorry to hear you are protesting this. We will update you as soon as we can. And that was in, I think, 2019, and they still haven't changed that notice. It's still on the website. So Bank of China is not really being transparent with this. And I think that's being used to their advantage to continue the financing. Also hiding behind private financing, which means there's less of an obligation to share these impacts, like gendered impacts. And I think that's a really huge problem. And it's such a big problem. I don't actually know how to tackle it. And I'm really curious what other people have to say about this, about how can you push for transparency when you don't know what's happening, or how can you really find and pinpoint where the financing is coming from so you can effectively target this. I don't know if it's a strategy that's, I think it's a strategy that's being used on purpose. But anyway, I'm curious if anybody has some experience of that in other places. But I think also really pressuring local governments who are investing with China is important, and showing them these case studies saying, look, this was not beneficial at all to this country, and here's how, and here's why we should stop doing it. And especially bringing information from the ground up and saying, your people are protesting this. Why is this going through? Oh, sorry, that's my cat. So yeah, I hope I answered that question. That was maybe a bit long, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. We have Sirius and Chitira later. Sirius, you have the floor for your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Silas Kavale. I'm a team leader of a youth movement that is trying to resist expansion of oil and gas activities in Uganda. I'm very happy to be part of this team now. My question will go to Ali. Many was speaking about the Chinese investment in Kenya and what I want, and giving some examples. First, I'll give an example of what is happening in Uganda. For us, on our side, we think we have achieved a lot when it comes to the campaigning of most of the European banks and insurers from investing in the eco project in Uganda. However, it seems our achievements are going to be washed away when we are seeing that most of the Chinese are coming in to support the eco project. This week, we received the news from the Minister of Energy informing us that the Exim Bank of China and the China Export and Credit Insurance Corporation, that is Sinsure, that they're coming in to give support to the eco project. Exim Bank is willing to offer over $3.5 billion to support the eco project. This is a big worry to some of us who have been, at least whom our hopes have been raised. And now we are wondering, how are we going to approach the Chinese? The Chinese approach may be different. And here we are so scared. So I would like to ask Ali to see how can she help us to train how we can engage the Chinese, especially on the approaches, if there are some trainings that the Global Forest Coalition can provide, so that we can engage the Chinese. The Chinese, we are seeing the investments are expanding within the country. Last week also, we received news that the Exim Bank is going to offer us, I don't know how much, but it's going to offer to the government of Uganda to upgrade some airstrips into international airports. But we came to realize that some of the airstrips that are talking about to be expanded, these are airstrips that are found within where oil and gas activities are found. For example, the Queen Elizabeth, we know that in Ngaji block, where the oil and gas activities are taking place, they want to expand that airstrip into an international airport. Then the second airstrip they want to upgrade is the Mansion airstrip, which is found within the Mansion National Park, and where most of the oil and gas activities are taking place. So they were looking at how they can expand these airstrips into international airports. So I would suggest Ali to see how she can help us on approaches, how we can engage the Chinese, especially the insurers and these banks, so that at least they can withdraw from supporting these projects, especially the eco project. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyrus. Chitira, your question.
Thanks, Kwame. My question, I have a question for Ali, which is, how are the protests to the BRI building up on the ground? Because I know that the BRI, or like a large chunk of their projects, are so far behind schedule in terms of where they wanted to be in 2023, and things are really, they're hitting a lot of roadblocks, both internationally as well as locally, which gives me a lot of hope. But are there any particular specific protests that are being very successful, or there's something that you can point us to? That is my question to Ali. And my question to Suparna is, what does it look like this year in terms of the conversation shifting more against green capitalism, or the fact that COP is being held in Dubai, and the irony in that. So generally, where do you see this whole conversation in context in this year particularly?
Thank you, Sitira. Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you. To address the first question, I think when we did this webinar last year, so we had a similar question about how to engage with the Chinese underground. I think I hope you were asking the same thing. But I think it's really complicated as well, because there's a lot of language barriers that come up, and I wish I knew how precisely to engage on the ground, but I really think it's quite a challenge. And I think it's really important that you brought up the point about trainings. Are there trainings on how to deal with these issues on the ground? And I think that's something that we can look into. I don't know if we have one currently, but I think it's really important, because how can you, it's, I guess the big theme about the BRI is, how can you engage when you don't know how to necessarily, because A, it's very not transparent, and B, it's very shrouded in mystery, but also being able to engage on the ground is not possible or feasible necessarily. So that's a really hard question to answer, and I'm really sorry if this is not oh, Valentina might be able to jump in after, but I'm sorry if I can't answer that as well as I would like to. You brought up a piece about the airstrips, and actually I think Kwame might have a lot to say about that, because yesterday there was the Stay Grounded webinar as well on that, and I'm curious if Kwame has more to say on that, because I think that is more his expertise, the airstrips in particular. Should I wait for this question, or to the next question?
Yeah, please. Next question.
Okay, next question was from Chitira. So talking about the protests and the roadblocks as well. I think that's a really big problem that's happening, is that a lot of the projects are really slow and really expensive, way more expensive than they should be. So I think a lot of involved parties are starting to realize, hey, this is like actually really not great. But on the ground protesting, I think what I thought was one of the best examples was the shutdown of the Lamu coal plant, which is in their port as well. It wasn't shut down because it was coal, but it was shut down because of the protesting. So it's not like the Kenyan government was like, you're right, this is bad, but it was shut down because of other reasons and protesting on the ground. Sorry, that was a bad sentence, but there's a lot of effective examples that I can't think of on the top of my head, but that's not to say necessarily the slowing down of these projects is always good, because then it ends up costing a lot more money, or things get abandoned. And I also think that's a bit of a problem if there's an abandoned project that's left there to continue to create problems. But I'm not quite sure I answered that as well as I would like either, but I hope that's okay. So moving on, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Suparna, you have the floor to respond to Shitira's question.
Yes, yeah. As we approach COP28 in Dubai, it seems that there is there are a lot of issues, and there is also a groundswell of protest and actions. And in terms of issues, you have the, laggard of the minimum climate obligation of $100 billion. You have to kind of come out with some kind of a fund which will flow in terms of loss and damage. And then the issue of fossil fuel phase out, plus how they are going to tackle the market-based solutions negotiations moving forward in terms of Article 6, which is again, as we say, the articles promoting false solutions. And in a way, you can say that these are all a groundswell of green capitalism. But, as you can see, even in the UN Climate Summit in New York last week, the declarations of the discourse is already changing in the sense that in terms of fossil fuel and coal phase out, they have already incorporated the phrase unabated. So they are talking of phasing out of only unabated fossil fuel and coal. So again, unabated means the fossil fuel and coal is abated. As I said, for coal, it could be co-firing with anything, starting from biomass, could be ammonia, could be anything. And in terms of fossil fuel, of course, it is moving towards more, gas is less emissive. And even if you see the Global Biofuel Alliance suggesting that, a mix of 20% ethanol to petrol or diesel can make it abated. And so this is where the whole trick and the whole confrontation will evolve from. And in terms of the market-based false solutions, of course, there is a problem with how these negotiations move forward. But it seems there are two issues in this. One, in terms of the supervisory body of this Article 6.4, they are now grossly focusing on removals, which again is like carbon dioxide removal, including land-based, heavily land-based, which includes plantations again, and also geoengineering to some extent, and maybe in a few years to large extent. And then also trying to see that how they can kind of regain the lost, a kind of lost, face of the carbon market after all those investigations coming out this year against the voluntary carbon market, on the red plus forest carbon offsets. And there are certain issues which, of course, will be kind of positive within the negative. One is that this whole issue of a certain amount of carbon credits being retired by the Western countries and not using it, but providing the climate finance in the sense of contribution and not compensation. But we have to see how the COP28 pans out in the last week. But of course, fossil fuel will be a big issue. Loss and damage will be an issue. And how we see the market-based solution vis-a-vis the non-market approaches within Article 6.8, how they kind of tackle these growing issues that are coming out from the UNFCCC space.
Thank you. Thank you, Suparna. I have Valentina.
Yes, just very briefly, a comment on Allie's analysis and comment on the lack of information available. And I think it's, we could read it and see it as a political strategy to make it difficult to assess and develop public policies. But, at the same time, it looks like, there is an intention, a planned intention by the Chinese state to, by one hand, promote the idea of being aware and, being worried about the situation. For example, China has a prominent role in hosting and promoting the CBD COP last year. So by one hand, you have, this impression of being internationally active to support biodiversity and other, issues. But at the other hand, we have some contradictions to us. We saw today with Alice and Suparna's analysis in terms of the obligations and the implementation of effective solutions. For example, it really catches my attention, this problematic aspect of, sending us an international message, but, at the same time, developing completely different strategies. So how to move forward from intentions, at an international level to, achieving a real and effective and gender just, responses to these. So just basically, I think it's a very clear political strategy, right? On that it's going on. It's already planned, I think, and it is important to resist against these kind of strategies because they violate, the right to know, the right to have information, clear information on projects who are going to impact the lives of communities and also the environment.
Thank you, Valentina. Suparna, I see your hand up.
Yes. In terms of Chinese investment and to see that how we can get also more information and see how to support the protests on the ground, that basically, there are groups within Asia and in Europe also who are trying for years to engage with the Chinese banks in terms of mending their ways of lending. And some of these groups work under umbrella. And one of the banks that today China is president of, that's the AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Bank, which is having its annual general meeting in Sharm el Sheikh currently for the last 2-3 days. And I think it will be good if one can link up to the groups who are part of the CSOs monitoring AIIB. And there will be some groups who are actually dealing exclusively on China. And I know that, but if anybody is interested, I can introduce them to the group there so that they can follow it up. And rightly sit there in Africa, actually, we need to see the political context of lending also. Africa has been a huge confrontational ground between the conventional multilateral banks like the World Bank and the Chinese investment. And this is like there for the last 20 years. And because a lot of the African government took Chinese investment as loans because they don't come with much conditions and safeguards. Whereas the World Bank loans at least come with functional, some kind of policies and conditionalities and some safeguards. And it started from Nigerian. I remember a case in Nigeria around 2004-5 of the railways or something, where the World Bank was interested to give them the loan, but the Nigerian government was finding it difficult in terms of the conditionalities, and so the loan was not accepted, and in turn, China actually gave them the loan. And this Chinese presence in Africa, it's been there from the 1980s, probably more, less 1970s, followed by Russia. The entire Tanzanian Zambian railway is a Chinese product, actually. And a lot of the roads around sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Africa, is all a Chinese investment, including the airports. And so I think there are groups within China, some of them, they quietly do their work. And there are groups outside China who are also digging into that. So probably if there is any follow-up to do, we can actually get in touch with those groups. And I could help in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suparna, for this clarification. I think there is a clear link between airport expansion and transport or exploitation of fossil fuels. For instance, what's happening in Kasese, we can have that link because expanding the airstrip in Kasese can be a means to bring some more materials to exploit oils in Kasese, and also it can be a means to take some oil outside Kasese in addition to the pipeline. So tourism and fossil fuel exploitation has a link in some ways, and in terms of impact as well. Tourism development and oil exploitation has similar impact onto communities. So that's more comments. We can discuss more serious if you want to. So having that said, I would like to thank Allie and Suparna for your presentations. It was wonderful, and you were very clear on the impact of the BRI project, the Chinese investment on communities, especially the gender impact, the impact on the environment. And if on the other hand, we also see the clear impact of the funds that goes directly for plantations development in the global south. That is supported by the Green Climate Fund. And it is clear that we have to hold accountable those companies that are from their activities are impacting dangerously the global south community. So having that said, we officially launched the BRI paper titled Depth, Displacement, and Biodiversity Loss, Assessing the Gender, Environmental, and Human Rights Implications of Chinese Belts and Road Initiative. Thank you so much for the interpreters. You help us understand each other. Thank you so much for the comms team, Global Forest Coalition comms team, and thank you for joining this launching of our reports. Next time, I'm sure you'll be together with us to continue our fight and to continue our campaign towards the real solutions of climate, real solutions on the ground to save the planet, to save the indigenous people, to save the local communities from the multinational oppression. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Kwame. Thank you.